This is a re-recording of the introduction to our macro writing workshop, which we held on Tuesday the 5th of March 2024. Now, we're going to assume that you already have the program installed and that you know how to use it. Everything we're going to do in the workshop can be done within Analysis Assign, but obviously it's equally applicable to all the other three programs as well. Before we actually go into the macro writing, I want to just give you a sense of where we see the macro writing fitting in the context of people wanting to add their own functionality to our program. So macros are something we envisage being accessible both to novice and advanced programmers. It's a way in which you can create your own workflows, customize the program to your own, create your own functionality, but they will always be standalone. If you want to actually start interacting with our menus, with our modules, then what you need to do is to create a plugin. And that's something that will require intermediate to advanced programming skills. We've already got a few collaborations going, so for instance with Harry Athanari and Ilya Kuprov's groups, and hopefully the plugins that they've been creating will soon be published, and then we can create some tutorials and hold some workshops to show you how to start using those. If you're interested in creating your own plugin, get in touch with Luca. He can get you started on that. If you're someone who's actually creating their own standalone software, but nonetheless you want to be able to move data from your program to ours, then obviously we'd recommend that you do that via the NMR Exchange format. That will also enable you to interact with other programs. Many others are now also compatible with the NMR Exchange format, and obviously also the PDB and BMRB databases. If you want to know anything more about the NMR Exchange format, then do get in touch with Elisa, who is our expert on that. Now we've got two macro writing tutorials available on our website now. This first macro writing tutorial will take you through how you can create some of your own macros, from really very basic ones to rather more advanced ones. It doesn't assume much in the way of Python programming skills, and will just sort of gradually build the complexity. Then we have a new macro writing tutorial, this GUI macro writing tutorial, and that will show you how you can start creating pop-ups. This is something that might be useful if you have a macro you want to be able to share with others and you just want to make it a bit more user-friendly. It's also useful if there's something that you do repeatedly but always on different items of data, so different spectra for instance. You might not want to have to change the spectrum name in your script every time. It might be more convenient just to have a pop-up and you select your spectrum from a drop-down menu. Obviously if you want to do this one, we'd recommend that you have already gone through this first macro writing tutorial initially. Now I suspect many of you will have used Python primarily as a scripting language. Our program is all written in Python, but obviously as a much larger program it uses object-oriented programming. And so we're going to have to introduce you to a few concepts within object-oriented programming. It's nothing to be scared of, it's quite easy, and in fact should make your life easier as well. So let's start by having a look at the way in which we structure our data. So here's a diagram which shows that within a project we've got all these different types of data that might sit within their spectrum groups, chemical shift lists, chains, etc. You can see that there are some things which are nested, so obviously a peak always has to belong to a peak list, and a peak list has to be associated with a spectrum. Now fortunately you don't need to memorize this diagram here because it's actually reflected in the sidebar of the program. So you can see here we've got spectra, spectrum groups, chemical shift lists, etc. And we've got the nesting works in the same way, so that our peak lists sit below our spectra. Now within object-oriented programming we would refer to each of these data types as a so-called class, and any particular item of data within that class would be an object. So one object would be this spectrum here, this HSQC spectrum. The HNCA would be another object, and they'd both be within the spectrum class. Now what we've done is to create lots of routines associated with each class that you can then already use and apply when you create your macros and your scripts. So, for instance, we've got methods, which you can think of as perhaps functions of things you might want to execute. So, for instance, a spectrum you might want to rename, you might want to estimate its noise, you might want to assign the dimension of a peak. All these sorts of things already exist, and you can make use of these routines. Similarly, each item of data or each type of data has got associated with it lots of variables, also referred to as properties. So a spectrum, for instance, might have a path where the actual data sits. It would have a spectral width. A peak would have a position, a height, a volume, a comment, etc. So once you've got hold of one particular peak, then you can easily just find the peak position, the height, the volume, etc. This sort of bank of methods and properties that we've created and which you can then use within your scripts, you may often hear referred to as a so-called API, an application programming interface. Now I'm going to introduce you to something that's perhaps a bit more unusual about our program, and you may not come across in other programs, and that is so-called project IDs, or we often refer to them as PIDs. You'll see in the sidebar, you've seen we've got these spectra sitting here. These spectra aren't just labelled by their name, HNCA, they're actually labelled SP:HNCA, and that is the project ID. So every object within the program has got this kind of an ID. And you can see for the peak list, because it's nested below a spectrum, it's also got the spectrum's name as part of its PID, and it starts now with PL. And in the tutorial we actually provide you with a list, so each of the different types of data, each data type of object has got a different shortcode, which hopefully is relatively intuitive. Now these project IDs are a really easy way to get hold of objects so that you can then do things with them, and the tutorial will also show you it's really easy to get a hold of them. So in the sidebar, for instance, you can right click on one and then copy PID to clipboard. In tables you can also usually find them. Very often you may have to click on the right click on the column header and select column settings and then select to show the PID, and then again you can just right click on one cell, copy click cell value, and then pop that into your script, and then that's the object item, the data item on which you can then do something or get some information from. So this is the structure of the macro writing tutorial. Some of what I've just talked about will be explained in this first section. I'll just show you very briefly the Python console. So here, this is the Python console, which we can bring up with space, and you can see it's got two sections to it. The top section will always echo anything that's done on the graphical user interface. I say anything, sometimes we miss things out, but it'll echo quite a lot of the different things that you do on the graphical interface. The lower section is where you can actually start writing some code, and when you go through the macro tutorial, we'll already at this point get you doing some exercises and starting to use that. We've also got a macro editor where you can actually start writing your code. It's got some quite nice little features. If you right click, you'll see that you can sort of indent or unindent whole sections or comment things out, which can be quite useful. If, however, you're someone who's already got a program that they really like to use for writing code in, then by all means use your own editor. I think most of the CCPN team will use PyCharm rather than this, and but then you can just run your script in the Python console using this command. Again, that's all detailed in the tutorial. And then it continues and just takes you through gradually building up the complexity of your macros with lots of exercises and example macros for you to see possible solutions. Then we've also got the other macro tutorial, which will show you how to create pop-ups. These essentially work on a kind of Lego principle, so we will provide you with all the code to create this, and actually with a relatively small number of commands you can quite easily build these quite nice pop-ups. So within a pop-up, you can see we can have all sorts of different kinds of things. We can have text labels, drop-down menus, entry boxes, buttons and things like that. These are all referred to as widgets, and we've created codes for a lot of different types of widgets like this, which you can then just put in and then build up your dialog box and then obviously associate particular functions with certain buttons, etc. Now, I said we've created these widgets. Our widgets in turn are actually based on a library called PyQt. I think we're working now with version 5.15. Those of you who've already done quite a bit of programming might perhaps already be familiar with this library, might be happy using that directly. You can do that, but on the whole we'd actually recommend that you don't, simply because as we move to newer versions of the program we might upgrade our PyQt version and go to higher versions, and then if you've used this version there could be some incompatibility as we move on, whereas we'll obviously always make sure that our widgets work and stay functional. The other thing is that we think we've made some of the options and things much easier to use within our widgets compared to PyQt. So this is the structure of the macro writing tutorial. There are some sections which are quite theoretical, so here taking you through what is a widget, what is a class. We'll actually start to write your own class when you do this tutorial, and but then take you through creating your own pop-ups, again with lots of exercises for you to do and possible solutions that we provide, gradually building up the complexity, showing you how you can create your own nice layouts, etc. So I just want to finish off then by highlighting that we've recently added a macro library to our website, so that's part of the support section of the website. At the moment there are not very many macros in there, but I will be adding more over the coming weeks. And hopefully some of you might also consider submitting some of your macros and sharing them with others. Obviously they'll all be attributed to their authors, etc. In general, we hope that this macro library will be a useful place for people to have a look and see. Perhaps someone else has already done whatever it is that you're thinking of writing a macro for, so that might even save you having to write a macro. But it can also be a place where you can have a look at what have other people done with their macros, how have they done things, and perhaps you can get some ideas for code to use in your macro. And obviously then finally we've also got our forum, and you can always get in touch there. We've got a section particularly dedicated to macros, so if you've got any questions, you're struggling to get something to work, then do get in touch and we shall do our best to try and help you. So now it's really over to you. Work through whichever macro tutorial you would like, depending on whether you've done the first one already or not, and we shall be on hand to help you out.